Okay, we are on the final part of the journey this year. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, your potato salad, and either your vegetarian or your meat. And welcome back. So later on this afternoon, as you know, we have got 30 ideas in 45 minutes. This is a session we run every single year. If you're a regular at Radio Days, you'll know it very, very well. And if you have a boss who says, what did you learn when you were at Radio Days? There's some ideas you can take from this session this afternoon and take back to your boss and say, oh, I learned this. And hopefully he or she will sign your pass to come to Radio Days next year. And then after that, we'll be announcing where we're going to be in 2025. Before that, we've got a really great session, and I must admit, I do not know George the poet, and I feel maybe a little inadequate for not knowing, but I'm very much looking forward to this session. So please welcome Sam Bonham, who's going to moderate this, and George the poet.
Thanks, Paul. We are nearly there. Everyone doing okay? Yeah, me too. Hey, welcome. My name's Sam Bonham. I am an editor of some of the BBC's news podcasts in the UK. I'm really excited to be here with George for the next 40 minutes or so to talk about George the poet, talk about who he is, talk about what he's doing in the podcast space. I'm going to try and do this a little bit like I've done a few other sessions with just like questions throughout. So like if you've got things that you want to ask that we're kind of talking about, do just stick your hand up, and Philip and Alex have got a couple of microphones and be roaming around looking for hands. So we will come to you if you've got a question to ask. I'm going to kind of split this up into three parts. We're going to talk a little bit about production and processes for George and for his podcast. We're going to talk about his music and spoken word and poetry and how that kind of intersects with podcasting and the music industry and the podcast industry. And then we're going to talk about politics and how George's politics is kind of a really fundamental part to his podcasting. And I think it's really exciting to have this conversation around those topics, because actually this, have you heard George's podcast? And George the poet it's a really kind of interesting mix of all of these different things: documentary, music, spoken word, politics, art. So this should be a really interesting conversation. Does that sound all right to you?
Sounds all right to me.
That sounds okay to you? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Let's go. George, for those people like Paul, who we've just been speaking to, who don't know much about you and your podcasting, give it to us from the beginning. What makes you tick?
Okay. I came from being a spoken word artist for some years. Prior to that, I was a rapper. And in about a 10-year career, I had built up a lot of questions about what is expected from people with my skill set in the media space. I always used the ability to rhyme to talk about the world. And as I grew, so did my interest in different things that were happening outside of just my personal experience. And I wanted to rhyme about them in long form. And podcasting was the only space that would allow that for me.
But it wasn't the first space, right? Because you were back at the beginning, you were a rapper, you were a musician.
That's right, yeah, I was a musician. From the age of 15 to 19, I rapped in the first wave of a British homegrown genre called grime. Grime music was very fast-paced, and it was full of anxiety, actually. Now that our language around mental health has evolved, I can say that it was a very anxiety-driven genre in my experience. And I wanted to create a bit of space for reflection, which is why I transitioned into poetry at the age of 19.
Yeah, and that transition from music into poetry, just tell us a little bit about that. Kind of like, what was that like for you? What was going on? Like, how did that happen?
So in my early grime years, I had the inkling that the ability to put words together in the way that we do is akin to spoken word poetry, but I didn't have any poets around me, so there was no one to really tease that thought out. But when I got to university, I was in such a different environment from the one I was used to rapping in. And I thought this is a good opportunity to pivot.
Yeah. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your production processes, right? We're going to hear a clip from one of your recent podcasts. Tell us a little bit about the black exploitation stuff.
Yes, so this is a clip from episode 9 of Have You Heard George's podcast. And in it, I look at the moment in American cinema known as blaxploitation. I've always seen blaxploitation cinema as the foundations of the hip hop that I grew up on. And in this clip, I use various techniques to make an otherwise quite technical historical investigation, try and make it a bit more personable, a bit more conversational, a bit unpredictable.
Okay, let's do it.
I think we were treated as a fad. Once the studios got on their feet, they decided they wanted to do big budget films, and they would rather put them in films that appealed to a mass audience instead of, an ethnic segment. There you go, sweetheart. Some water, hon?
Oh yes, please.
There you go. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. You're listening to the sounds of Bobby Womack across 110th Street. He's basically saying, you won't believe your eyes if you come to the NSG. Clients and prostitutes knocking boots, single mums so strung out they lost the youth, you know the vibes. 110th Street was the borderline between Harlem and Central Park, a quintessential mark where racial tension sparked. The song was a soundtrack to a film of the same name. This was in blaxploitation's heyday. Both the track and the movie quickly became...
Just before we get into the specifics of that clip, just tell us like broadly kind of what's going on Have You Heard George's podcast?
So Have You Heard George's podcast is like an anthology of 20 to 30, sometimes 40-minute episodes in which I talk about whatever I want. So in this episode, I was talking about blaxploitation in order to lay the foundation of the career of one of the most famous rappers of all time, 50 Cent. But because I really wanted to talk about 50 Cent from an angle that I hadn't heard in mainstream media, I had to go all the way back to the 70s when he was born, explain the traumatic loss of his mom, and what it indicated about American society at the time.
Yeah, okay. So in that clip we've just heard, there's a lot going on. Talk us through your production process.
Right, so after trawling through hours of interviews and movies and music, obviously, I came up with some kind of rough narrative. Okay, in the 1970s, there was this depiction of the African-American experience in cinema. The depiction was fueled by, crime and all sorts of stereotypes that eventually laid the foundations for mainstream hip-hop. First, I started with interviews from actors and directors, writers from that wave of cinema. Then I wrote a piece about what blaxploitation was. Then I decided where I was going to place it.
You wrote a piece? Oh, a piece of music?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, my collaborator, my producer, writes pieces of music for this podcast, but I wrote poetry.
Yeah.
So I find a way to make it all flow lyrically and rhyming and whatnot. And then I think, all right, if I want people to feel like this is an entertainment experience, how can I move beyond just saying it directly? So I thought, let's go to America in audio form. If I had the budget, I would do it in TV. So in audio, I set up a diner, an American diner, a quintessentially American environment. I interact with the waitress. Someone drops a glass over there, just to give you the feel of a diner. The music, the soundtrack that is playing is directly relevant to the story, so it continues in a speaker in the diner, and I'm talking as if I'm a documentary presenter sitting in a diner, recounting the story of blaxploitation.
You mentioned that you work with someone else. So you've got you dealing with the words, and then there's another creator producing music.
Yeah, Ben Brick. My producer is a polymath, so not only does he screen all my ideas, but he composes original score. We approach it like film, like TV. He composes original score. He designs the audio. He does all the sound design. So I'll say to him, I want a glass to drop in the middle of my speech, and I want it to jolt the audience out of, lethargy or whatever. And he'll do it, and I'll tell him directionally where the glass should. So he's all of those things, and he's essential to making this happen.
It's a truly kind of collaborative.
Truly collaborative.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very cool. How long are you spending on episodes? Like, how long is something like that? That kind of. I mean, that was only like 30 seconds, 60 seconds. I think it was. But like episodes like that.
At the time, we used to average about a month and a half on an episode. Now it takes longer. Ever since the pandemic, it's taken longer for various reasons. But what I do now, my process is slightly different. I create the skeleton of an episode. So I might not finesse the dialogue until the last moment, or I might not finesse the script until the last moment. But for like 10 months, I'll sit with a demo. In
10 months?
Yeah, it's a long process because there's a lot of music to build, and what I have learned is that it benefits from me sitting with the structure for as long as possible. The structure is the real challenge. How do you transition between ideas? How do you introduce experimental elements that don't become overwhelming? At the start of my podcast journey, I loved the challenge of trying to get it done within a month. But now I find it more rewarding to treat it like a real research project, an undertaking, and the more time, the better.
Yeah. You've recently partnered with the BBC, so now your podcasts are going out on BBC Sounds, and you're kind of working with the BBC. How has that changed the process, like having the national broadcaster, the public service broadcaster involved in your, this is an art project, right? This kind of like artistic expression.
Yeah. So our partnership with the BBC is not that recent. It's 5 years old now. And the clip that we just listened to was from the first episode I did with the BBC. And I feel really fortunate in that there hasn't been any change substantially for me in working with the BBC. There have been moments where the direction of my, let's call it journalism or investigation, is politically contentious or is politically new and is a bit maybe frightening for some elements within the BBC, where they've had to say, okay, well, let's just run our checks and make sure this is all good. But yeah, nothing was done to change what I said. They just had to double check that it was consistent with the facts.
And your most recent series, Series 4, you worked with an orchestra.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
We did that for Series 4 and Series 3, the BBC Concert Orchestra. So with this podcast, at the outset, I was convinced that there is a hybrid way to do podcasting that draws heavily from some of what I experienced in the music world. So in music, we can listen to a range of genres all the time, whether we're actively listening or passively listening. But if you watch a movie, you're going to hear classical music in the score. If you watch any Disney or whatever animation with your kids or siblings, you're probably going to hear, pop music, And then there's the music that you listen to, whatever you grew up with, whatever you choose. I wanted that range in podcasting. I didn't feel like podcasting should sound like an interview or a true crime series. I feel like it should be elastic as animation, which inspired this concept in the first place. So yeah, we worked with an orchestra because I felt like that was essential. My producer, Ben Brick, is classically trained, so he's able to compose beautiful sounds just for our podcast, which give you the experience of watching a beautiful film purely in your mind, though.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to hear another clip in a moment, and I'm keen to talk a bit more about your music. Tell us about this next clip that we're about to hear, poetry and podcasting.
So this next clip is one of the most recent episodes. We released it towards the end of last year, and it deals with a period, again in the 1970s, of third world political formation. And it focuses on Jamaica, the leader of Jamaica at the time, Michael Manley, and his efforts to pull together with other leaders of the third world in trying to forge a path independent of America, independent of the USSR, and purely in service of the poorest populations of the world.
Cool, let's do it.
After Kwame Nkrumah a decade before, along with Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Michael Manley became a major voice defending the right of poor countries to make a choice, to choose how to govern themselves, take care of their people, and recover their wealth. These leaders reasoned that poor countries outnumbered rich ones in the United Nations, and if they didn't use this to their advantage, their people would face continued violations. They noticed the West developing welfareism, investing in social housing and healthcare systems, and they wanted this change to extend across the water. A new international economic order.
Even in the way that you listen back to those podcasts, you look like a man who's listening to music. You're kind of like, your eyes, you're closing your eyes, you're kind of like bouncing your head, it's rhythmical, you're kind of like moving with the audio there.
Yeah, 'cause I sat with the research for a long time. I did the reading, which is the advantage of just, letting it marinate. And the magic of music just makes all that research come alive. It makes a lot more people want to listen. I feel that I evolved as a student when I began rapping. And then I evolved as a poet. I evolved as an undergrad student when I became a poet. So I do think that there is magic in music that can elevate the audio form, regardless of what you're discussing.
So this is podcasting as an art.
Most definitely, most definitely. Yes, I was led to podcasting through practical considerations. I wanted long form. I wanted the license to deep dive. But coming from music, I had real creative ambitions, real artistic ambitions, which podcasting just gives me like acres and acres and acres of space to just develop whatever I feel is the most beautiful thing I'm capable of.
Yeah. At this point, does anyone have any questions that they want to ask George on any of the stuff that he's been talking about? No, if you do, just stick your hand up and one of the guys will come to you. What does the music industry think about what George the Poet is doing?
In the early days, I remember turning to my music publisher at the time and saying, look, I know you guys have been waiting on an album or something from me. I don't think an album is the best use of my time. I have something new, which is heavily musical, and I sat them down and I played them a 7-minute summary of, it was Theresa May. Theresa May was Prime Minister at the time in the UK. it was a summary of Theresa May's week, and she was having a mess. She was having the worst week ever. And I wrote what I thought was quite a funny piece about this. I recorded it to a piece of music from the Netflix series House of Cards, just to position it culturally. And I remember the head of my publishing company saying, I'm not in the podcasting business, I'm in the music business. And
So you were talking about a podcast like then to people in the music industry.
yes,
Yeah.
because it was musical, and it was what I was offering in place of an album. Now, people have often said that the fact my offering is called a podcast is kind of, it handcuffs me in a way. It's restrictive because it's more than a podcast. But I don't hold that view. I hold the view that podcasting is up for grabs. It's still new enough that we can tell people this is our conception of podcasting. And those guys didn't see the vision at the time, and I was forced to kind of move forward independently. I have since won awards in the music space, and I'm sure they know that this was a slight missed opportunity for them. But I feel that en masse, podcasting still didn't move in my direction. So a lot of those incumbents in the music industry were happy to just roll out, I would say, cookie cutter formula podcasts, and I don't think they feel they missed a big opportunity because there's probably too much work in what I do, not to sound, condescending.
Well, there clearly is a lot of work if you're spending months making something. But it is interesting, that thing around the podcast industry has not moved in your direction. Like, you don't have any competitors doing the same thing that you're doing in a meaningful way. Maybe there are podcasts and musical things out there that maybe I'm not aware of, but in a kind of mainstream, certainly in the UK, there are not any people doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it's true.
Why is that?
I will say that my producer, Ben Brick, and myself, we were hybrid artists by the time we came to this project. Not many artists are classically trained and have gone multi-platinum in Japan, as he has. Not many poets were formerly rappers, as well as, academics at the same time. So we brought a lot of disciplines together, and I will say that gave us an advantage. And I guess trying to reverse engineer what we do, I don't know, you're in the space as well, you're a producer. When you hear our material, has it influenced you to try and reverse engineer any of our techniques or try our approach for yourself?
I'm super excited to be here on stage with you. And as I said to you, I met your producer a few months ago and just had a fascinating conversation with him as well. It has inspired me a little bit, actually, and certainly some of the projects that I've done, like hearing the musicality of what you guys have been trying to do. It's like one of my thoughts has always been, why is there no podcast that sounds like a Bon Iver album? That's what I want. I want a podcast that sounds like a Bon Iver album, because that's just beautiful sound, right? But I make a lot of podcasts, and I don't have, there's a resource thing here. We could you spend, I don't have the time and the resource to put that kind of effort and that kind of musicality. Some of the sounds that we've heard in the two clips, we'll play another one in the moment, that's like layered, complex stuff. Let's just talk, the BBC partnership and just finances more general. Is this a kind of financially viable project? How is George the Poet surviving, spending months and months making episodes?
Yeah, it is financially viable. I continue to do other stuff. I do a lot of engagements. I do some stuff in the entertainment space. Rappers always call me to be on their albums, which is an honor because they're very influential. and some of my favorite artists. But you've probably touched on something very valid. Like, remember what I said was my initial inquiry at the start of this journey. Why is it that people with my skill set, many from my demographic, are funneled into making music that's not the most intellectually challenging? I'll be honest, I'm going to put my ideological cards on the table. A lot of young black men are funded to make rap music that, despite coming from very difficult circumstances, is not analytical and is often revels in the problems that produced it. But the money flows in that direction much easier than it does to fund a PhD candidate who wants to look at the effects of decolonization in a musical form. The money flows easier if you want to talk about the same old things in the same old way. So there's a real question about what support as a society, whether it's the private sector or the public sector, what support we give to those curious young innovators.
Because there clearly is an audience for Have You Heard George's podcast, right? So it's not about like numbers. It's not bums on seats. Like, you have an audience,
right? Which I found consistently when I was a rapper in my teens. I used to go back and forth with my rap peers about the content of our music. I used to say, we can talk about more than just our own pursuit of wealth. We can talk about anything. We can talk about our families. Why is there not like a slew of rap verses for Mother's Day, for Easter, for Christmas? We could talk about anything. And I always got pushback from my circle who said that people don't want to hear that. And even though I was young and there was a lot that I hadn't read, I was just very skeptical of that argument, because we only select from what is familiar to us. So if we don't have a wide range of poets and a wide range of, subject matter within rap, then we don't really know what we would prefer. So throughout my career, I've tried to make it a point that I'm trying to demonstrate that there's demand beyond the norm. But what I've found more than anything is that institutional factors are probably the biggest spanner in the works. I think this is a top-down problem, not a grassroots problem.
We're going to talk more about your politics in just a moment and how that intersects with your podcast. But I think we have a question from someone in the audience over there. If you could introduce yourself, say who you are and where you're from.
Will do. Hello, George. Thanks for sharing your story. I'm Wade from Australia. Obviously, taking into account that you're mixing mediums and looking for different inspiration and trying to create something original, what do you listen to? What do you take inspiration from? I kind of got a sense from the music side of things, but maybe from spoken word, other podcasts or radio. What do you listen to?
Thanks for that question, Wade. One of the biggest influences on my podcast in the early days, this is going to be quite unexpected, was the series Rick and Morty. I love that Rick and Morty went in any direction. I love that they didn't shy away from a tangent and that they would make whole storylines off of a very obscure, silly premise, because it felt empowering to me that whatever obscure niche interests I have, if they're presented compellingly enough, there's probably a way. I was just talking about the podcast Alphabet Boys. That's a podcast that I've been listening to recently. Again, it dives into quite a niche moment post-George Floyd, when American intelligence agencies started moving into social justice movements and introducing criminal elements which ended up destabilizing these movements. This is contemporary history, and it might take mainstream media a little while to start reporting on this stuff, but you find podcasts being on the forefront of some of these conversations. That always interests me. But mainly right now, I'm doing a lot of reading, about, let's call it political economy. I don't know what the slang term for that is.
I mean, your podcasts are political, right? Your podcasts are about race and religion and colonization recently. We're going to play another clip, Common Ground. Tell us a little bit about this clip.
So this is from a couple years ago when I was trying to make the point that, look, there is another dimension to this audience engagement. You don't have to be passive consumers of art. I'm inviting you to see yourselves as an essential part of this process, which could have transformative potential.
Imagine this podcast is a house, and every episode is a room. I didn't build this house just to sit here alone. So whenever you visit me, I'm over the moon. Now the conversations we have when you come around, that's us establishing common ground. If you enjoy this podcast, give me your feedback. To you it might be nothing, but trust me, I need that. gtpcg.com. Check it out. It's not long. Now my train of thought can meet you at this platform, so let me guide you through this journey. It's hard to predict where this experiment will take us, because right now it's super early. But all I know is, some of my biggest fans don't exist yet, but overlooking them would be a total misstep. When they arrive, I want to be there for them, and I need you to help me prepare for them. I don't know who, I don't know where and when, but one day they're gonna come across this work that's gonna bring them into my world, and I want their lives to change there and then.
Thank you.
That's cool. So, what is George the Poet trying to do? What are you trying to say?
The task has evolved over time. When I started poetry, I was in university reading all sorts about society and politics, and I just wanted to provide a megaphone for what I was learning in my lecture halls. I wanted to broadcast it to people that will never go to university, people that are too overworked, people that are too distracted, and, emotionally, mentally unavailable to have this reflection. So I started off trying to amplify reflective conversations. Over time, I took on this mission with regards to our music. How can I expand the imagination of what we can do? Right now, I think, I'm still on that journey. Expanding people's expectation, expanding the demand for analytical material, expanding the scope for who believes that they are entitled or welcome in conversations about the direction of society, the product of history, the lens that we use to analyze our contemporary experience. I really want to just press reset, because there is an underlying assumption in much of British culture, you could probably say academic culture. There's an underlying assumption that these conversations are for some people and not for others. I totally reject that.
Do you think podcasting and podcasts are a good place for you to have that conversation? Like, what are the kind of pros and cons to having a political conversation on a podcast like that in the way that you do?
Yeah. You know what, Sam? I feel like we're never too far from a political conversation. I feel like when we discuss in the UK, whenever it snows, the whole country loses its mind. That's and we have a laugh about it, we have a moan about it. There's a political question at the core of it. What would it take to expand our capacity in order to deal with changing weather conditions. The changing weather conditions themselves are political in nature. Why is it so cold in winter? Why is it getting so hot in summer? So politics is kind of like the shadow of most conversations. And a lot of the time, it's impolite. It's impolite to really get into it. It's awkward to just take a polite, dinner conversation, small talk, and make it, neoliberalization. Not everyone wants to do that all the time. Yet, there are so many latent opportunities in those moments where we're just listening to something for background music, or we're just catching up with our favorite celebrities and seeing what they're talking about. Those are moments in which I feel like, yes, our expectations can be expanded. Our norms can be interrogated. In fact, they need to be, because increasingly I have the feeling that the world is potentially not getting better. I grew up being taught that everything is progress. The more technology, the more elections we have, the more progress we make. I think that many of us wouldn't just take that for granted. We're in Germany right now. For maybe 2 years, people have been talking about the energy crisis that Germany, Europe in the broader sense, is heading for, the dangers of deindustrialization, not making stuff no more. We need a way to talk about this stuff that isn't awkward, that isn't antagonistic. And I think podcasting provides a canvas, a blank canvas, in which the audience expect long-form content, and they're kind of open to whatever direction you take it in. We don't have the old institutional stricture of this is the way the BBC will do a BBC Two documentary, and this is the way you got to format your ideas, and this is the kind of English that we're used to hearing. People just want to hear conversations now.
Cool. Well, let's hear a conversation from the audience. Have we got someone with another question over in the corner? Someone got a microphone? There's a few people there, hands up. Yep, this guy here at the front with the microphone.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sven from Belgium. Nice crossover that you do there. Reminds me a little bit of Lou Reed taking poetry to music in New York. But that's my question. Do you think the art of poetry, poems which are written, maybe read out loud, that podcasts can change or even revolutionize the work of poets, poetry, poems? As an art form?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. That's something that I feel that I should be doing more work on. A lot of poets don't actually have an expectant audience for their work. And I say to poets all the time, stop talking about your heartbreak. There's a lot, it's a different element of the problem that we have in rap music. You have expectations. You enter this thing being taught what the audience will and won't accept. You need to give people the benefit of the doubt. Bring your audience beyond it. Use your poetry to talk about what happened in Somalia, what happened in Belgium, what's going on in a broader sense. But then that goes to an extra layer of work that we're all going to have to do to ensure that we are investigating the world responsibly. And not just doing a quick Wikipedia search.
I think we have another question here in the middle.
Hello, thanks very much. It's been great to listen to you. You seem very...
Introduce yourself, Karen. Come
Sorry, Karen from the BBC in London. You seem really self-assured. Do you ever suffer from imposter syndrome or self-doubt? And is there anything you wouldn't talk about?
Yeah, I went to Cambridge University from an obscure neighborhood in London, an underfunded neighborhood. And I dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome then. What I feel now is an anxiety that my views will move on. And what I said 5 years ago might not age well. I'm about to release a book next month. It's called Track Record. And we just recorded the audio book, and I'm racked with anxiety. I had to give my wife an apology proactively, because I said to her, you're going to continuously hear me groaning with things that I realized I didn't frame well or I forgot to say in the book. And that rattles a lot of this material that you just heard from the podcast. I haven't listened to it since I released it, because I'm constantly racked with anxiety that, you know, I've moved on and I didn't do the best job. But that's fine. I seem self-assured because ultimately, if I have to explain what I did, I stand by it. But I'm prepared to stand corrected. Is there anything I won't talk about? No.
You said to me that there was nothing you wouldn't talk about.
Yeah, no, not really.
Guys, thanks so much. Some really great questions. George, let's just end by looking ahead. What is next for George the Poet?
I think the task I've taken on is lifetime, is a lifetime commitment, a lifelong commitment. There is a lot to do to expand our expectations of ourselves as media people, as artists, as non-politicians who sometimes may feel alienated from the political process. I'm very concerned about that. So I'll continue to work on that in whatever way I can, and art will continue to provide a limitless arena for new experiments. So I'll be doing that in TV and film at some point, maybe on stage, whatever.
Great. George the Poet, thank you so much for joining us here at Radio Days. It's been great.
Thank
you.